Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak, your podcast available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Tuesday, the 4th of June in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, India decides. Election results trickle in for the world's biggest democracy as Narendra Modi seeks a third term.
Bloomberg learns Rishi Sunak may harden his position on the European Convention on Human Rights as Nigel Farage announces he is standing for election.
Plus, how Birkenstock, a 250-year-old German shoe company, became an improbable luxury powerhouse.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
Early results in India's election indicate that the race is much closer than any of the exit polls had estimated. While such polls have a mixed track record in Indian elections, they correctly predicted the broad outlines of the results in 2019 and 2014. Narendra Modi and his BJP party are seeking a third term in power, running the world's fastest growing major economy. Bloomberg's Mary Nicola says that markets are watching the results closely.
The key thing here is just about what happens in terms of the formation of the government. If you get, let's say, a supermajority, what happens if the government then focuses more on its political agenda rather than the economic agenda? And that's absolutely crucial and could actually put a little bit of a stop into the rally in Indian equities if we see that.
Our markets live strategist Mary Nicola there, referring to the supermajority of 400 seats in India's lower house that Modi is seeking. That's well beyond the 202 seats the BJP would need to win this election.
Here in the UK, Rishi Sunak is considering an election pledge to seek reform of or leave the European Convention on Human Rights. Sources have told Bloomberg the Prime Minister is discussing the move to counter Brexit architect Nigel Farage's return to politics. Our UK politics reporter James Wilcock has more.
A highly respected YouGov MRP poll predicted Labour would get the largest majority in 100 years last night. That should be cause enough for Conservative misery, yet it was this man who really started the despair.
They are split down the middle on policy, and frankly right now, they don't stand for a damn thing. So our aim in this election is to get many, many millions of votes.
Yes, Brexit headliner Nigel Farage has changed his mind and plans on leading the right-wing challenge to the Conservative Party. If the new Reform UK leader can do as he claims, Defence Secretary Grant Shapps warns it would erode the Tory vote.
A vote for reform, very simply, is a vote for Starmer. And I don't believe that's sensible. I don't think it's what the country really wants.
This leaves Sunak headed to TV debates tonight, needing to win back potentially both the centre and right wing of the electorate. In London, Bloomberg Radio, James Wilcock.
British consumers are holding back on spending as higher bills hit home. Card data from Barclays shows spending in May rose by 1% compared to last year, the slowest pace in 3 years. The pullback follows annual price hikes on bills for household essentials in April, including council tax and broadband.
Marks & Spencer CEO Stuart Makin saw his pay increase by £2 million last year, according to the company's annual report. The boost comes as the retailer enjoyed a revival in food and clothing sales. Last month, M&S said that it was in the strongest financial health since 1997. Makin's total remuneration for 2023 to 2024 will be £4.7 million.
A software update glitch at the New York Stock Exchange sparked trading halts and false displays of 99% drops in companies, including Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway. The disruption is one of multiple trading hiccups in recent days. It was resolved after 45 minutes when the exchange reverted to running a different software version. Bloomberg's finance reporter Catherine Doherty says the frequency likely isn't a coincidence.
We have seen 3 incidents in the last week or so since T+1 was implemented. So, and every time that, like this morning, there's been incidents like this, the answer has been, oh, it's not tied to T+1. But again, if you have the third time within a less than week time span, I think the questions are still going to be asked, and hopefully we'll get more answers.
Bloomberg's Catherine Doherty there. The New York Stock Exchange says it'll cancel the bad trades in Berkshire Hathaway and is reviewing the erroneous halts to determine whether to cancel any of those. Last week, a computer error prevented prices from printing on the exchange for over an hour.
The retail stock trader who drove the GameStop craze is apparently worth $290 million. Roaring Kitty posted a screenshot of his portfolio on Reddit, showing a huge bet on the company. Bloomberg's Bailey Lipschultz says that it's impossible to verify if it's real.
The last time he posted an update on that portfolio, last time checking in on the portfolio, was worth about $34 million. So a humongous jump in terms of the actual value underlying that position, in addition to the fact that there's some $45 million potentially in cash. But nonetheless, it drove a flurry of trading activity.
But Bloomberg's Lipschultz adds that there are questions about how far the GameStop rally can go. Given the many changes since the meme rally in 2021, GameStop shares jumped 21% yesterday, adding roughly $1.7 billion to its market cap. Now, in a moment, euphoria cut short. Narendra Modi is expected to win a third term as Prime Minister in India, but perhaps by a much smaller margin. Well, we'll be discussing the outcome as the counting of those votes is underway. Still a lot of uncertainty, but quite a bit of market reaction to discuss. But before that, a nice story on the Bloomberg terminal that at least I found very interesting. Lab-grown diamonds, anyone? De Beers says no thanks after a 6-year foray into making these steeply discounted synthetic gems, so sort of man-made gems. They are pulling out of this offering. The whole idea, actually, for De Beers had been to try to drag down the price of lab-grown diamonds so that they did not compete with, obviously, what De Beers is most well known for, which is the mined gems. But doesn't
so there would be two
work.
Sort of products that people, consumers, be able to choose from, and there would be a clear distinction between them. But now, in the revamp of Anglo-American, which currently owns De Beers but is trying to sell it off, essentially, this has led to a rethink of that business as well. So they're going to be winding down that 6-year programme that broke one of its oldest taboos.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really interesting piece on the Bloomberg terminal for you this morning. I think the most important line out of the whole thing, apparently the technology is so advanced now that experts need a machine to tell the difference between a mined gem and a synthetic one.
I think you'd still know, Caroline.
Yeah.
You're supposed to bite it, or was that silver? I can't remember. Anyway, let's get back to our top story this morning and the vote counting underway in India. Close to 970 million voters. Indian stocks have been pulling back, though, from record highs. The rupee and bonds have weakened as Prime Minister Narendra Modi's party is seen winning a narrow victory. Joining us now with the latest is our EMEA News Director, Rosalind Matheson. Ros, good morning. Talk us through what we know about the vote counting process. Narendra Modi still projected to win at this stage?
Well, that's right. He's still expected to win. The question is by how much. He already had a majority going into this election, but he needs 272 seats to win. And we had those exit polls yesterday, which have bounced us around a bit because they were indicating quite a whopping victory for Modi. Some exit polls were talking about 350 seats, even 400 seats out of a 540 plus seat parliament, and that's a super majority. And so there was a bit of exuberance about the possibility of a very big win for Modi. And what we're seeing is in the actual vote count, it's not going to be as big as that. In fact, it could be around the margin of what he already had in the prior election, which is still pretty good. But when you're Modi, the expectations are you're going to do better every time. And that seems to be where the disconnect has come in. The question is, does he have enough to govern outright on his own with his own party, or is he forced into more of an alliance, which is quite uncomfortable for him with some of the smaller parties? And that's where you get, difficulty for him with those smaller parties, with their policies and demands, and he has to start to govern in a more of an unwieldy coalition. At this point, it does seem he's leading in about 300 seats, which is enough for him to govern on his own, but we need to see how the full vote plays out to see if he can really do that or not.
In terms of what it might mean then for key policies, especially around spending, of which there has been a lot under the last Modi administration, economic growth and also youth unemployment, the big lines.
Well, that's right. I mean, he's really pushed a lot around infrastructure to build ports, roads, airports, the sorts of things that will draw investment, because the key thing for him has been about enticing businesses to come to India as opposed to China and to bring that money in. But that's not been evenly spread across India. So you've seen a lot of spending in certain areas which are like proximate to ports and so on. But inequality rising in many other parts of India. So youth unemployment rising in many poorer states, for example, not a lot of investment going in there. And so you can see a scenario in a smaller majority for Modi, or even a coalition, where he's going to be pressed to spread that money a bit more evenly across India and to invest more in some of those poorer states where we can see inequality really rising. And so you could see some of the investment being shifted to different parts of the country as a result. And so he could be a bit hamstrung by Parliament. I mean, India's Parliament is notoriously rowdy. Quite often you see big disruptions that go on. It takes ages for some legislation to get through. So you could just see that things slow down for Modi in terms of the pace of which he can get things done.
Can we say, or how can we say that this perhaps vote might reflect the changing opinions of Narendra Modi in India? He's been criticised during his 10 years in power as seeing an increasing focus on majority Hindus, attacks against Muslims and erosion of India's democratic values.
Well, he's personally incredibly popular. That's the interesting thing about India. Even as his party or his government gets criticised for, failing to improve youth employment and so on, none of it seems to stick to him. He's a bit like Teflon. He's one of those leaders where he personally is not held responsible by most people in India for what's happening there. However, they do seem to be perhaps holding his party a bit responsible and individual constituencies. And so that's where you might see some of these votes shift in interesting ways. But as you say, Modi has been criticised both internally and externally for pushing quite a hard, Hindu nationalist agenda, and that traces back to Gujarat when he was the chief minister in 2002, and we saw the communal violence that happened there. And certainly he's been criticised by human rights groups for less tolerance of dissent more broadly, freedom of the press, the ability to have robust debate in society, and for potentially encouraging some of that kind of communal tension that we've seen flare up. And that's been awkward inside India, but also for allies like the US, Western countries that need India in the tent when it comes to China. But then can they really criticise Modi for human rights at home? And that's presented them with quite a dilemma also.
Yeah. Rosalind, thank you so much for being with us. Bloomberg's EMEA News Director, Rosalind Matheson. So we'll continue to track then as the vote counting continues in India.
Now, the German sandal maker Birkenstock held its IPO on the New York Stock Exchange last year after a decade of explosive growth. The 250-year-old brand has managed to emerge from family squabbles to transform itself into a luxury behemoth. The CEO, Olivia Reichert, who's the first non-Birkenstock family member to ever run the company, says the brand can keep up its growth. Bloomberg's Tim Lowe has written a piece that captures how the orthopaedic shoemaker has become an improbable luxury empire. Tim joins us now. Tim, good morning. What is it that makes Birkenstock distinct then as a footwear brand?
It certainly is a distinct brand. In terms of the footwear industry, two things jump to mind that sort of set it apart. One, the company has kind of bucked industry trends over the decades. It still manufactures its own footwear. It never outsourced the production to lower cost countries in Asia back in the 80s and 90s. And those factories are located almost primarily in Germany. There's one small one in Portugal. But so it still produces basically 30 million pairs of sandals a year, almost all in Germany. And it is basically obsessed with what it calls the footbed, which is sort of the chunky sole that anyone who's worn a pair or seen them will instantly recognize, which is made of cork and latex, and has sort of been the secret sauce for this Birkenstock family. It was developed over about 3 generations. And it wasn't until Carl Birkenstock in the early 1960s sort of took this platform that his father and grandfather had been tinkering with since about 1900 and put it on the bottom of an open-toed sandal that the family had finally put all the pieces together and created a shoe that they could scale and sell. And it created this sort of cult classic that has had such a run for the last 60 years or so.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.